Each day I grew more aware that everybody knew where I had spent that morning, and feared me for it. I had arrived like a dragon. Maybe the king had sent for me to help him defy the Bunam and help him overturn the religion of the whole tribe. And I tried to explain to Ramaleo, at least, that Dafu and I were not practicing any evil.
I don't blame you, sir.
I said, the human race needs guys like this, King. Change must be possible. If not, it's too damn bad.
Yes, sir.
I am a high-spirited kind of guy, and it's the destiny of my generation of Americans to go out in the world and try to find the wisdom of life. It just is. Why the hell do you think I'm out here, anyway?
I don't know, sir.
I wouldn't agree to the death of my soul.
Me Methodist, sir.
I know it, but that would never help me, Ramaleo. And please don't try to convert me. I'm in trouble enough as it is.
I no bother you, sir.
I know. You are standing by me in my hour of trial. God bless you for it. I also am standing by King Dafu until he captures his father, Gamailo. I thought for a minute, and then I said, Ramaleo, I am going to send a letter to my wife, and you are going to take it to Pavente and mail it. As soon as this business with the king is completed, and I have helped him capture his dad, I'll join you in Pavente.
Please God, he make quick, said Ramaleo.
That afternoon I wrote to Lily as follows. Honey, you probably are worried about me, but I suppose you have known all along that I was alive. The flight was spectacular. Charlie did not relax in Africa. We didn't see eye to eye about any subject, so we parted company. There was a fellow around named Ramaleo, and we became friends. I asked him to show me uncivilized parts of Africa. There are very few of these left. We have made 2 stops. I met a person who is called the Woman of Bitterness. She looked like a fat old lady merely, but she had tremendous wisdom. When she took a look at me, she thought I was kind of an oddball, but that didn't faze her. She told me I had Gruntu Molani, which is a native term, hard to explain, but on the whole it indicates that you want to live, not die. I wanted her to tell me more about it, but I am afraid I will never be able to see her again, because I goofed, and we had to get out. I thought I had lost my opportunity to study my life with the aid of a really wise person. But I love Dafu, king of the 2nd tribe we came to. I am with him now, and have been given an honorary title, King of the Rain. But I am not in a position to tell you much more, except in general terms. I am participating in an experiment with the king, and this is an ordeal daily. Well, Lily, everything is going to be different from now on. When I get back, I am going to study medicine. My age is against it, but that's just too damn bad. I want you to enroll me at the medical center. If the medical center won't let me in, apply first to John Hopkins and then to every other joint in the book. How are the twins and Ricey and Edward? Much love, and see you soon. Ramaleo and I said goodbye in the morning when he set off with the letter. My very stomach seemed to drop as the gates shut on his scarred and seamed gaze, and I felt unreasonably low. So I was brooding in my palace room when Tatu came in. I rose, and she led me through the passages of the ground floor to the king's outdoor court. Already he was in his hammock, under the purple shadow of his giant silk umbrella. He said, I suppose you gather what day it is? I figure, yes, it is the day, Lion Day for me. This is it, eh? Bait has been eaten by a young male. He fit the description of Gamailo. Well, it must be great, I said, to think you are going to be reunited with a dear parent. I only wish such a thing could happen to me. You will share the hopo with me, he said. And although I didn't know what this meant, I of course agreed. My own umbrella approached. Bearers brought my hammock. Do we go after the lion in a hammock? I said. When we reach the bush, we will continue on our feet. A gaudy crowd had collected. just as on the day of the rain ceremony. Drummers, men in paint, shells and feathers, and buglers. The bugles were about a foot long and had big mouths of green oxide metal. They made a devil of a blast, like the taunt of fear. So with the bugles and drums and rattles and noisemakers of the beaters' party gathered around us, we were carried through the gates of the palace. The arms of the Amazons shook with the strain of lifting me. The poles were almost too much for their shoulders as they carried the brutal white rain king, with his swarthy reddened face and dirty helmet and gaudy pants and big hairy shins. Once we were well into the bush. The women set me down and I stepped onto the blazing ground. The king, too, was standing. With the game beaters were the Bunam, and following very closely, a white creature, a man completely dyed or calcimined. Under the coat of chalk I recognized him. It was the Bunam's wizard, the black leather man. I identified him by the folds of his narrow face in this white metamorphosis. The beaters departed, leaving the Bunam, the king, the Bunam's wizard, and myself, plus 3 attendants with spears.
"Come, Henderson, my friend,"
Dafu said, and we began to walk. The 3 men with spears fell in behind us. "What are these fellows for?"
"To help maneuver in the hopple," he said.
"You will see when we come to the small end of the place." The king began to go quickly, not so much walking as bounding, and as we followed, the spearman and I, it occurred to me that the grass was high enough to conceal almost any animal except an elephant, and that I didn't have so much as a diaper pin to defend myself with. "King," I said, "wait a minute." He waited for me. I stared into his eyes at close range and said, "Not even a weapon? Just like this? Are you supposed to catch this animal by the tail?"
"I must not be armed. What if I were to wound Gamilo?"
He spoke of the possibility with horror. "What about me? I'm not supposed to defend myself either?" He did not answer for a moment. Then he said,
"You are with me."
He set off again. My trousers hampered me as I rushed over the ground behind him. Any minute I expected the lion to burst on me like an eruption of fire, to knock me down and tear me into flames of blood. The king mounted on a boulder and drew me up with him. He said, "We are near the north wall of the hopple." He pointed it out. It was built of ragged thorns and dead growths of all sorts, heaped and piled into a thickness of 2 or 3 feet. This hopple was a giant funnel or triangle. At the base it was open, while at the apex or spout was the trap. Only one of the 2 sides was built by human hands. The other was a natural formation of rock, the bank of an old river, probably, which rose to the height of a cliff. Besides the high wall of brush and thorn was a path, which the king's feet found under the spiky yellow grass. We continued towards the small end of the hopple, over fallen ribs of branches and twists of vine. "You certainly are on fire to get to grips with this animal," I said. He stopped and turned to me.
"You were equally on fire when it came to lifting up the Mumma."
"That's correct, Your Highness," I said. "But did I know what I was doing?"
"No, I didn't. But I do."
I followed him toward the end of the hopple. The beaters, about 3 miles away, had begun to make their noise. It sounded very distant, far out in the golden stripes of the bush. While I squinted against the sprays and flashes of sunlight, I saw a sudden elevation in the hopple wall. It was a thatched shelter which sat on a platform 25 or 30 feet in the air. A ladder of vines hung down, and the king began to climb it sailor fashion from the side, pulling himself powerfully and steadily up to the platform. From the dry grass and brown fibers of the doorway, he said, "Take hold, Mr. Henderson." I took hold of the ladder and began climbing. Placing both feet on each rung, the spearmen stood and waited until I joined the king. Now they passed under the ladder and took up a position around the corner of the hopple. Here at the end, the construction was primitive, but seemed thorough. A barred gate would be dropped to trap the lion after the other game had been driven through, and the men would prod the animal in position with their spears so that the king could effect the capture. On the fragile ladder, which wavered under my weight, I reached the platform and sat down on the floor of poles lashed together. On the platform stood this shell of straw, and from the opening of the interior side of the hopo I saw suspended a woven cage weighted with rocks at the bottom. It was bell-shaped and made of semi-rigid vines which were as tough as cables. A vine rope passed through a pulley suspended from a pole which was attached at one end to the roof tree of the hut, and at the other was fixed into the side of the cliff, a width of 10 or 12 feet. Below it ran another pole from the floor of the hut. It, too, was set in the rock at the other end. On this pole, or catwalk, no wider than my wrist, if that wide, the king would balance himself with the rope and the bell-shaped net, and when the lion was driven in, Dafu would center the net and let it drop. Releasing his rope, he was supposed to capture the lion. "What do you think?" he said. I couldn't bring myself to say much about it, but hard as I fought my feelings, I couldn't submerge them. Not on this particular day. I was visibly struggling with them. He said, "I captured Ati here." "With this same rig?" "And Gamailo captured Safo." I said, "Take the advice of a... I know that I'm not much, but I think the world of your Highness. Don't..." "What is the matter with your chin, Mr. Henderson? It is moving up and down." I brought my upper teeth down on my lip. By and by I said, "Your Highness, excuse me, I'd rather cut my throat than demoralize you on a day like this, but does the thing have to be done from up here?" "It must." "Can't there be an innovation? I'd do anything. Drug the animal. Give him a Mickey." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," he said. I think his gentleness with me was more than I deserved. We sat together, or crouched, outside the grass wall of the shelter on a narrow projection of the floor, almost within reach of the weighted trap which hung, waiting. Opposite us was the cliff of gritty rock, and following the line of it beyond the end of the hopo, I saw a sort of small stone building deep in the ravine. "Does somebody live there below?" I asked. "No." "Is it abandoned?" "It is not for the living," the king told me without glancing at the building. "A tomb?" I thought. "Whose tomb?" "I think they are driving rapidly." "Ah! Do you think you can see them?" "It is getting loud." He stood, and I did too, and shaded my eyes from the glare. "No, I don't see." "I neither, Henderson. This is the most hard part. I have waited all my life, and we are within the last hour. Look there!" He pointed to the cliff side of the hopo, where deer with twisted horns were running. Whether they were gazelles or elans, I couldn't say. A buck was in the lead. He had tall, twisted horns like smoked glass, and he leapt in terror with blasting breath and huge eyes. The small animals were making currents in the grass. Flocks of birds went straight up. They flew towards the cliff and down into the ravine. The deer clattered beneath us. I looked below. Those were planks at the bottom. I hadn't noticed that. They were raised 6 or 8 inches from the ground, and the king said, "Yes, after the capture, Henderson, wheels are put under so the animal can be transported." He stooped to call instructions to the spearmen. After the buck and the does, which squeezed through the narrow opening of the hopo with heart-bursting terror, came a crowd of small beasts. They rushed the opening like immigrants. "Lion is there! Lion! Lion!" The king stood, pointing, and about 100 yards away I saw a slow stirring in the grass. Not the throbbing of the smaller animals, but the circular, heavy disturbance which a powerful body made. "You can take him, king! I know you can!" I cried. The king set foot on the slender pole. He took 2 turns of the cage rope around his arm and began to release the knot. The cage, with its big irregular meshes of vine and the hoof-like stone weights, swung from the more rigid part at the bottom. Except for the rocks, the thing had almost no substance. It was as near to being air as the Portuguese man-of-war is to being water. With banging and with horn blasts and whooping and screams, the beaters came on, the ones at the rear leaping up from the grass, which was shoulder-high, and blowing depraved notes on those horns of green and russet metal. Shots were fired in the air, and at the front, spears were stitching and jabbing.
"Did you see that, Mr. Henderson? A Maine."
Dafu leaned forward on the pole, holding the rope, and the rock weights banged together over his head. I couldn't bear to see him balanced there on a mere kite stick with that fringe of rocks clattering and wheeling inches above him on the circular contraption. Any one of them might have stunned him. "King, I can't stand this." "Be careful, for Christ's sake. This is no machine to horse around with." For the count of about 20 heartbeats, I only partly knew where I was or what was happening. Mainly, I kept a fixed watch on the king, ready to hurl myself down if he should fall. Then at the very doors of consciousness, there was a snarl, and I looked down from this straw perch, I was on my knees, into the big, angry, hair-framed face of the lion. The lips were drawn away from the gums, and the breath of the animal came over me, hot as oblivion, raw as blood. The barred door had dropped. Small creatures were still escaping through the gaps and streaks of fur, springing and writhing, frantically coiling. The lion rushed under us and threw his weight against these bars. Behind the barriers, the men prodded him with spears while he fought at the shafts and tried to catch them in his jaws. They were too deft for him. In the front rank, spear points feinted and worked towards him, while from the back there flew stones, at which the animal shook his huge face with the yellow corded hair which made his forequarters so huge. His small belly was fringed, and also his forelegs, like a plainsman's buckskins. Compared with this creature, Atty was no bigger than a lynx. Balancing on the pole in his slippers, Dafu released one turn of the rope from his upper arm. The net bucked, and the motion and the clacking of the stones caught the lion's eye. The beaters screamed up at Dafu, "Yenuti là-bas!" Ignoring them, he held fast to the line and turned around the rim of the net, which was now level with his eyes. Stone battered stone as the contraption spun around. The lion rose on his hind legs and threw a blow at these weights. I now felt the weight of the lion against the post that held up the platform. They were no thicker than stilts, and when he hit them, they vibrated. I thought the structure was going to crash, and I clutched the floor. Under Dafu's feet, the pole swayed, but he rode out the shock with rope and net. "King, for God's sakes," I wanted to cry, "what have we got into?" Again, the thick flock of rocks flew forward. Some struck the hopper wall, but others found the animal and drove him under the circling weights of that cursed net of vines. God curse all vines and creepers! The king began to sway out as he pushed and maneuvered this bell of knots and stones. I was freed for one moment from my dumbness. "King," I said, "take it easy. Mind what you're doing." The lion, getting up on his back legs, struck again at the dipping net. It was now within reach, and he caught his claws in the vines. Before he could pull free, the king let fall the trap. The rope streaked down from the pulley, the weights rumbled on the boards like a troop of horses, and the cone fell on the lion's head. I was lying on my belly, with my arms stretched out toward the king, but he came to the edge of the platform, unhelped by me, and cried, "What do you think, Henderson? What do you think?" The beaters screamed. The lion should have been carried to the ground by the weight of the stones, but he was still standing nearly upright. He was caught on the head, and his forepaws spread out the vines, and he fell, fighting. His hindquarters were not caught in the net. The air seemed to grow dark in the pit of the hopple from his roaring. I lay with my arm still extended to the king, but he didn't take it. He was looking downward at the netted face of the lion, the main belly, and the armpits. The bonhomme was below and signaled upward with an ivory stick. The king pushed off from the edge of the platform and took hold of the rope, which had been stopped in the pulley by a knot. The overhead pole was bucking and dancing as he got hold of the frayed tail of the rope. He hauled at it, and the pulley started to scream. The lion was incompletely caught, and the king was going to try to work the net over the animal's hindquarters. I called to him, "King, think it over once. You can't do it. He weighs 1/2 a ton, and he's got a solid grip on the net." I didn't realize that only the king could remedy the situation, and no one could come between him and the lion. Dafu's legs were wide apart in the center of the pole, which bowed deeply and swung and swayed under the energetic movement of his legs. And the rope and pulley and the block made cries as if resigned, and the stone weights clattered on the planks. The lion fought on his back, and the whole construction swayed. Again I thought the entire Hapo tower would collapse, and I gripped the straw behind me. Then I saw some smoke or dust above the king, and realized that this came from the fastenings of hide that held the block of the pulley to the wood. The king's weight and the pull of the lion had been too much for these fastenings. One had torn. That was the puff I saw. And now the other went. "King Dafu!" I yelled out. He was falling onto the lion. I saw the convulsion of the animal's hindquarters. The claws tore. Instantly there came blood, before the king could throw himself over. I now hung from the edge of the platform by my fingers, hung and then fell, shouting as I went. The king had rolled himself from the lion. I pulled him further away. Through the torn clothing, the blood spurted out. "Oh, king, my friend!" I covered my face. The king said, "Oh, Sango." The surfaces of his eyes were strange. They had thickened. I took off my green trousers to tie the wound. These were all I had to hand, and they did no good, but were instantly soaked. "Help him! Help!" I said to the crowd. "I did not make it, Henderson," the king said. "What, king? What are you talking about? We'll carry you back to the palace. We'll put some sulphur powder into this and stitch you up. You tell me what to do, your majesty, being the doctor of us two." No, they will not take me back. Is it Camilo?" I ran and caught the rope and pulley, and threw the wooden block like a bolo at the still thrusting legs. I wound the rope around them 12 times, almost tearing the skin from them, and yelling, "You devil curse you, you son of a bitch!" He raged back through the net. The Bunam then came and looked at the ears. He reached back and called authoritatively for something. The man in the dirty white paint handed him a musket, and he put the muzzle against the lion's temple. When he fired, the explosion tore part of the creature's head away. "It was not Camilo," the king said. "Henderson," he went on, "you will see no harm comes to Ati." "Hell, your highness, you're still king. You'll take care of her yourself." I began to cry. No, Henderson," he said. His belly, through the torn clothing, looked like a grate of fire, and some of the beaters were already giving death shrieks. The Bunam stood apart. He kept away from us. "Bend close," said Dafu. I squatted near his head and turned my good ear towards him, the tears meanwhile running between my fingers. "Sango also is my successor," he said, touching my hand. "I take your place? What are you talking about, your highness?" Eyes closing, he nodded slowly. "No child of age makes the Sango king." "Your highness," I said, and raised my weeping voice, "what have you pulled on me? I should have been told what I was getting into. Was this a thing to do to a friend?" Without reopening his eyes, he smiled. The king had little life left in him now. He was picked up by the beaters, the end of the Hapo was open, and we started to go down the ravine among the cactuses towards that stone building I'd first seen from the platform. On the way, he died of the hemorrhage. This small house, built of flat slabs, had 2 wooden doors which opened into 2 chambers. His body was laid down in one of these. Into the other they put me. I scarcely knew what was happening anyway, and I let them lead me in and bolt the door. So they led me inside, crying my head off. I was too bereaved to ask questions. By and by, a person, rising from the floor, startled me. "Who the hell is that?" I asked. Then I recognized a head of hair shaped like an umbrella pine. "Ramaleo!" "Me here too, sir." They hadn't let him get off with the letter to Lily, but picked him up just as he was leaving town. So even before the hunt began, they had decided that they didn't want my whereabouts to be known to the world. Ramaleo, the king is dead, I said. He tried to comfort me. That marvelous guy, dead. Fine gentleman, sir. He thought he could change me, but I met him too late in life, Ramaleo. I was too gross, too far gone. I sat on the floor, bent over double, and cried without limit. Thus the day passed, and the night passed too, and in the morning I felt light, dry, and hollow. The sky was pink. I saw it through the bars of the door. The Bonham's black leather man, still in his coat of white, was our custodian, and brought us baked yams and other fruit. 2 Amazons were his staff, and everyone treated me with peculiar deference. I said to Ramaleo, Dafu said that when he died I should be king. Dem call you Yassi, sir. Does that mean king? That was what it meant. Some king, I said, musing. I would have to be husband to all those wives. You know like that, sir? You crazy man, I said. How could I even think of taking over that bunch of females? The king's death has hurt me too much. I am stricken. Can't you see that, Ramaleo? I am stricken down and I can't function at all. This has broken me. You no look so too bad, sir. Besides, I said, the king's death was no accident. What you mean, sir? It was no accident. It was a scheme. I began to be convinced of it. Somebody tampered with a block and pulley at the hopple. Now they can say he was punished for keeping Ati. Would you put this past these guys? No, sir. Now they think I'll be more pliable than he was. But they're wrong. I will not work with them. That's another reason why we must think of crashing out of here. Let's case the joint. Where are we? What can we do? Or what have we got? We got knife, sir, said Ramaleo. It was his hunting knife, and he had slipped it into his hair when the Bonham's men came after him on the outskirts of town. Oh, good man, I said, and took the knife from him in a stabbing position. Dig, better, he said. Yes, that makes sense, I agreed. We began to go over the wall. After a minute examination, we found a chink high up between the slabs of stone, and we began to dig at it. Sometimes I held Ramaleo up in my arms. Sometimes I let him stand on my back while I was on all fours. Quietly he chipped and dug. Eventually he put his eye to the hole and said low, I see, sir. He dismounted. I stood up, rubbing the grit from my back, and put my eye to the hole. There I saw the figure of the dead king. He was wrapped in a shroud of leather. The Bonham's assistant was the death watcher and sat on a stool by the door sleeping. Beside him were 2 baskets of cold baked yams, and to the handle of one of these baskets was tethered a lion cub. I judged it was 2 or 3 weeks old. The fellow's sleep was heavy, though he sat on a backless stool. I'll fix your wagon, I promised him in silence. Well, Ramaleo, I said, this time let's use our heads. First, I am in line for the throne. They wouldn't want to hurt me. They've got the lion cub, who is my dead friend, so they are moving along pretty fast. Boy, we've got to move even faster. What you do, sir, he said. Bust out, naturally. Do you think we can make it back to Bevente as we are? He couldn't or wouldn't say what he thought of this, and I said, It looks bad, huh? You stricken? Ramaleo asked. Are you kidding? I could walk across Siberia on my hands. And anyway, pal, there's no choice. It'll be tough, all right. We'll pack along those yams. That ought to help. You won't stay behind, will you? He had no time to answer then, as Horko came to pay us a visit. He called me Yassi and showed his fat red tongue. How do you do, Mr. Horko? The red jewels in his ears dragged them down, and as he grinned, I looked at him, but not openly, with hatred. As there was nothing I could do, however, I converted all this hatred into wiliness, and when he said, You now King Roy Henderson, Yassi Henderson, I replied, Yes, Horko, very sorry about Dafu, aren't we? All very sorry, damage, he said, for he loved to use phrases he had picked up in Lamu. "No more sangu, you Yasi." "Yes, indeed," I said. I instructed Ramaleo, "Tell the gentleman I am glad to be Yasi, and it's a great honor. When do we start?" "We had to wait," said Ramaleo, interpreting, "until the worm came from the king's mouth, and then the worm would become a tiny lion, and this little lion would become the Yasi. Tell Mr. Horko it's a terrific honor. I will do the best job I can. I think we have a great future. I ran away from home in the first place because I didn't have enough to do in my own country, and this is the type of opportunity I have hoped for. How long do we have to stay in this death house?" "Him say just 3-4 days, sir." "Okay," said Horko. "Not long. You marry Tootle a lady." He started to throw his fingers to show his by tens how many there were. 67. "Don't worry about a thing," I said to him. When he had left, I said to Ramaleo, "We're going to get out of here tonight." "Yes, sir. What we do?" "You'll start yelling in the night. You'll say I've been bitten by a snake or something. That leather fellow will come with the 2 Amazons to see what's wrong. Then you take this stone, you understand, and jam it in by the hinge so the door won't close, okay?" "Okay, sir." I waited for moonrise, the time I had chosen to go into action. When I judged the time was right, I took a deep, stiff breath so that my sternum gave a crack. My ribs were sore. "Go," I said to Ramaleo. He began to yell. I added some groans, and then the Budam's man woke up. I heard his feet. Then he must have stood listening as Ramaleo repeated in his quaver, "Yasik Kumuti! The king is dying." Then the door of the king's tomb opened, and the Bunam's man began to shout. "Oh," said Ramaleo to me, "him call 2 soldier lady, sir." "The stone is ready," I said. "Go to the door and do your stuff. If we don't get out, we haven't a month to live." It was the murder in my heart which calmed me most. It gave me confidence. It was like a balm to me that if I got my hands on the Bunam's man, I would be the death of him. Him, at least, I will do in, I kept thinking. I made cries of fear and weakness. A strip of board was removed from the door. By the lifted flare, the Bunam's man saw me writhing, clutching my leg. The bolt was dropped, and one of the Amazons began to open the door. "The stone!" I cried as if in pain, and I saw by the flare that Ramaleo had pushed the stone below the hinge exactly as I had told him, although the point of a spear held by the Amazon was right under his chin. He retreated towards me. The Amazon yelled when I pulled her off her feet. I struck her head against the wall. The door had been swiftly closed, but it stuck on the stone just enough to let me get my fingers on the edge. Both the other Amazon and the Bunam's man pulled against me, but I tore the thing open. I worked in silence. First, I hit the Amazon with the edge of my hand, a commando trick. It was enough. She fell to the ground. Then I went after the man. 3 strides, and I caught him by the hair. I lifted him straight up at arm's length so that he could see my face by the almost risen moon. I snarled. As I took him by the throat and began to choke him, Ramaleo ran up to me, yelling, "No, no, sir. I'm going to strangle him." "You no kill him," said Ramaleo earnestly. "Bunam no chase us." I flung the man into the room we had been locked in, and the 2 Amazons with him. Ramaleo took away their spears, and we bolted the door. We then went into the other chamber. The moon had now risen, and every object was visible. Ramaleo picked up the basket of yams, while I walked over to the king. I looked into the cowl. "Goodbye, king," I said. I left him. But then I had an impulse. The tethered cub was spitting at us, and I picked him up. "What you do?" "This animal is coming with us," I said. Ramaleo started to protest, but I held the creature to me, hearing its tiny snarl, and pricked in the chest by its claws. "The king would want me to take it along," I said. "Look, he's got to survive in some form, can't you see?" Ramaleo gave in to me, and we started our flight, leaping through the shadows of the moon, up the side of the ravine. We put the hopple between ourselves and the town, and headed into the mountains, on a straight course for Bevante. I ran behind with the cub, and all that night we did double time, so that by sunrise we had about 20 miles behind us. Without Ramaleo, I couldn't have lasted 2 of the 10 days that it took to reach Bevante. He knew where the water was and which roots and insects we could eat. The yams gave out on the 4th day. We also had the lion, which had to be fed and cared for. I had to mince grubs and worms and make a paste, and I fed the little creature by hand. During the day I carried the cub under my arm, and sometimes I led him on the leash. He slept in my helmet, with my wallet and passport, teething on the leather, and in the end devouring most of it. I then carried my documents and the 4 $1,000 bills inside my jockey shorts. On the 10th day we came to Bevante. Sitting parched on its rocks, the town was not so parched as we were. The brown Arabs watched us arise from the sterile road, myself greeting everyone with 2 fingers for victory, like Churchill, and giving a cracked, crying, black-throated laugh of survival, holding out the cub, Dafu, by the scruff to all those head-swathed and silent men. "Get the band! Get the music!" I was saying to all of them. Pretty soon I folded, but I made Ramaleo promise to look out for the little animal. "This is Dafu to me," I said. "Don't let anything happen, please, Ramaleo. It would ruin me now. I can't threaten you, old fellow. I'm too weak. I can only beg." Ramaleo said I shouldn't worry. At least he told me, "Okay, sir." Then I let him take the animal from me, and I slept for a while and had dreams. Or I didn't sleep, but lay on the cot in somebody's house, and those were not dreams but hallucinations. After several weeks in Bevante, beginning to recover, I said to my guide, "Well, kid, I better get moving while the cub is still small. I can't wait till he grows into a lion, can I?" No, you're too sick, sir." And I said, "Yes, the flesh is not in such hot shape, but I will beat this rap. It's merely some disease, otherwise I'm well." Ramaleo was much opposed, but in the end I made him take me to Toulouse. After this, I slept in the back of the jeep with the lion cub under my army blanket while Ramaleo drove us to Harar, Ethiopia. That took 6 days. In Harar, I made Ramaleo a few $100 worth of presents. Then I filled the jeep with all sorts of stuff and gave it to him. After we had said goodbye, finally, for good, I realized that he still dogged my steps and kept an eye on me from a distance as I went around Harar with the cub. When I boarded the plane for Khartoum, he was still observing me. In Khartoum, I had a hassle with the consular people about arrangements. There was quite a squawk about the lion. They told me if I didn't go about it in the right way, the lion would have to be in quarantine. I put the lion down on their desk. He knocked down their stapler and nipped them through their clothes. They got rid of me in the fastest way they could, and I flew to Cairo the same evening. There I called Lily on the transatlantic phone. "It's me, baby," I cried. "I'm coming home Sunday." "Jean," I heard. And after that the waves of half the world, the air, the water, the earth's vascular system came in between. Of what she said, I could make out no more than 2 or 3 words. "For a big broad, you sound very tiny," I kept saying. She could hear me all right. "Sunday, Idlewild," I said. This was Wednesday. On Thursday we flew to Athens. I thought I should see the Acropolis, so I hired a car and a guide, but I was too ill and in too much confusion to take in very much of it. On Friday I got to Rome. On Saturday we flew again, by way of Paris and London, which was the only arrangement I could make. I had no curiosity to see any of these places. To me, the best part of the flight was over water. I couldn't seem to get enough of it, as if I had been dehydrated, the water combing along, endless, the Atlantic. The stewardess was aware that I had the lion cub in the baggage compartment, as I had ordered chops and milk for him. and there was a certain inconvenience about my going back and forth constantly and prowling round the rear of the plane. "There's a little kid on the plane," she said. "He'd probably adore the lion cub. He looks pretty sad." And I said, "Who is it?" "His parents were American, but he doesn't speak English at all, only Persian." "Go on," I said to her. "The father worked for oil people in Persia. The kid was raised by Persian servants. Now he's an orphan and going to live with grandparents in Carson City, Nevada." "Poor little bastard," I said. "Why don't you bring him, and we'll show him the lion?" He was very white and wore short pants with strap garters and a little dark green sweater. He was a black-haired boy like my own. "Come here, little boy," I said, and reached for his hand. "It's a bad business," I told the stewardess, "to ship a little kid around the world alone." I took the cub and gave it to him. I don't think he knows what it is. He probably imagines it's a kitty. But he likes it. As a matter of fact, the animal did lighten the boy's melancholy, and so we let them play. When we went back to our seats, I kept him with me. I gave him his dinner, and at night he fell asleep in my lap, and I had to ask the girl to keep an eye on the lion for me. I couldn't move now. She said he was asleep too. When I awoke, the little boy was looking at the pictures in a magazine. The stewardess came by. "We are going to land for a while," she said. "The hell, you say? Have we crept up on New York so soon? I told my wife to meet me in the afternoon." "No, it's Newfoundland, for fuel," she said. "It's getting on towards daylight. You can see that, can't you?" "Oh, I'm dying to breathe some of this cold stuff we've been flying through," I said. "I guess you'll have an opportunity," said the girl. "Well, let me have a blanket for this child. I'll give him a breath of fresh air, too." We started to slope and to go in, at which time there was a piercing red from the side of the sun into the clouds near the sea's surface. It was only a flash, and the next grey light returned, and we entered the lower air, which lay white and dry under the grey of the sky. "I'm going to take a walk. Will you come with me?" I said to the kid. He answered me in Persian. "Well, it's okay," I said. I held out the blanket, and he stood on the seat and entered it. Wrapping him, I took him in my arms. "All set? Why, where's your coat?" the stewardess asked me. "That's all right. I'm country bred. I'm rugged." So we were let out, this kid and I carried him down from the ship and over the frozen ground of almost eternal winter, drawing breaths so deep they shook me, pure happiness, while the cold smote me from all sides, and the hairs of my beard turned spiky as the moisture of my breath froze instantly. I told the kid, "Inhale, your face is too white. Breathe in this air, kid, and get a little color." I held him close to my chest. He didn't seem to be afraid that I would fall with him, while to me he was like medicine applied, and the air, too. It also was a remedy, plus the happiness that I expected at Idlewild from meeting Lily. And the lion, he was in it, too.